Burgis. Stephanie Burgis grew up in East Lansing, Michigan, but now lives in Wales with her husband and two sons, surrounded by mountains, castles, and coffee shops. She writes wildly romantic adult historical fantasies, most recently Scales and Sensibility and Good Neighbors, as well as fun middle grade fantasy adventures. Take it away, Stephanie.
Hi, I am going to start with the beginning of chapter 1 of Scales and Sensibility and then skip to the end. So chapter 1. It was a truth universally acknowledged that any young lady without a dragon was doomed to social failure. But it was becoming increasingly obvious to everyone in Hathergill Hall that for Penelope Hathergill, actually having a dragon would guarantee disaster. Mother! Penelope's piercing shriek rattled the glass in the chandelier above her. He's done it again. Oh, dear. Lady Hathergill closed her eyes and sank back in her chair, waving a limp handkerchief in the general direction of her niece. Do see to that, won't you, Eleanor? Yes, Aunt. Sighing, Eleanor folded the mending she'd been working on and rose to help her cousin. It was a servant's job to clean most messes, but the maids had mutinied several days earlier, and the dour housekeeper, Mrs. Braithwaite, who intimidated even Penelope, had announced that she too would give notice if any of her girls were asked to touch that foul creature's mess again. And as Penelope herself could never be expected to clean up any of the messes that she caused, well, that left Eleanor again. Please stand still, Penelope, she said, as she wiped at her cousin's back with a handkerchief, if you want me to get it all off. It's disgusting. Penelope wriggled impatiently and glared at the brightly colored dragon perched on her shoulder. And it's all your fault, horrid creature. With a sudden, impatient gesture, she reached up and pushed him off her shoulder. Rock! His tiny cobalt blue wings fluttered uselessly. He tumbled snout over tail, heading straight for the ground. Penelope! Eleanor dropped her slime-covered handkerchief and dived for the falling dragon. She grabbed him just in time and gathered him up to her chest, stroking his hot skin consolingly. What were you thinking? You know his wings were clipped by the breeder. He could have been hurt. He deserves it. Penelope crossed her arms and glared down at him. He knows perfectly well what he's doing, I can tell. Just before he let it out that time, I heard him laugh out loud. It hadn't been a laugh. That chortling sound was a sign of fear in dragons. Eleanor had read about it when she'd first learned that the family was buying a dragon for Penelope's social debut. But she bit her lip to hold back the angry remark that wanted to escape. There was only so much that a poor relation was allowed to say in this household, especially when it came to her cousin Penelope. And if she let Penelope see the look on her face right now, she would be in real trouble. So instead, she looked down at the dragon, who was shivering in her arms. From the tip of his snout to the end of his tail, Sir Jessamine Carnarvon Artos was only 2 feet long, and when he curled up like this against her, he formed a big ball of warmth that felt nearly the same as her old tomcat back home. But his worried golden eyes blinked up at her from a face that glittered such a deep blue and green, his scales looked like precious jewels. Given her choice of dragon, Penelope had of course chosen the prettiest one she had seen, and not the cleverest, nor the calmest, which would have been far more useful. It would take a dragon with nerves of pure steel to ride calmly on Penelope's slim shoulder as she alternately shrieked with laughter or with fury and smacked him every time he accidentally slid an inch or let his claws dig into her skin. Eleanor's jaw clenched at the thought of it. If either of Eleanor's younger sisters had been there, matters would have gone very differently. Rose would have stood nose to nose with Penelope and shrieked directly back at her about her intolerable cruelty to an innocent beast. Harriet would have come up with a mathematically perfect plan to exact revenge. When their parents had died, though, 1 year earlier, a flurry of panicked letter-writing had erupted in the extended family. After 6 months of heated wrangling about whose responsibility they really were, the 3 Tregarth girls had been scattered to the far corners of Britain to join different sets of relatives. Family or not, no one was willing to take on all 3 sisters at once. So that left only Eleanor to face their cousin Penelope now, alone and all too miserably aware of the practicalities of the situation, as always. It was her lifelong curse. Rose and Harry wouldn't have let practicalities hold them back. Rose was too romantic and high-minded to care. And as for Harry, well, Eleanor was certain that anyone who spent her life mastering higher mathematics simply for her own amusement was incapable of feeling intimidated by Penelope. Eleanor, though, couldn't stop thinking about exactly what would happen if she let loose all the outrage that had been building inside her for the last 6 months. As hard as she tried, she couldn't imagine any good result. All that she could imagine was the mundane reality of disaster. She would be tossed out of Hathergill Hall in disgrace, leaving no one who even tried to moderate Penelope's behavior to the servants, the poor little dragon, or anyone else who ever got in her cousin's way. And with less than 5 shillings in Eleanor's purse, Uncle John, of course, saw no need to give her an allowance, as she was already living off his generosity. Leaving Hathergill Hall wouldn't bring her freedom. It would only mean utter ruin. So she took a deep breath and unclenched her jaw. She set Sir Jessamine gently down onto the ballroom floor and said as quietly and as humbly as possible, "Perhaps you would like to take a rest, Penelope. Your nerves—" "A rest! A rest!" Penelope's voice built up in volume until Eleanor's ears rang, and Sir Jessamine scuttled behind her legs, wrapping his tail tightly around her ankles. And Eleanor's cousin has quite a bit to say in response. I'm going to skip to the end of her complaints. And then Penelope said, "Papa fobbed me off with this worthless excuse for a non-functioning dragon." Penelope pointed at Sir Jessamine with a trembling finger. His glittering green ears flattened in panic against his head. His tail tightened around Eleanor's ankles until she teetered on her feet and had to hold out her arms to keep her balance. "Penelope, please," she said, "if you could just try to be a little more patient with him." "You're doing it again." Penelope stared at her. "Listen to her, Mama. She really is pretending that it's all my fault." "I only meant," Eleanor began, "after everything I've done for you." Penelope choked in a sob. "How could you, Eleanor?" Eleanor stared at her cousin, open-mouthed. She couldn't even think of a response. "I allowed Mama and Papa to take you in despite all the horrid inconvenience. I allowed one of my maids to do your hair. I even told my friends it wasn't kind to mock you for being so grim and sour-faced all the time. I told them you couldn't help being plain and tedious. And Mama promised that you would give me so much help with my debut that it would all be worth it in the end." Eleanor swallowed. Her mouth felt dry. There was a distant ringing in her ears, like the whistle of a steam engine charging towards her, something loud and angry and dangerous that she had never, ever given into before. Penelope didn't seem to hear it. "I even let you be fitted from new gowns from my seamstress. Mama asked if I would mind it too terribly, but I said no because I was tired of you looking like a crow all the time in those terrible black gowns." Eleanor heard her own voice as if it came from very far away, beyond the ringing in her ears. "Those black gowns were mourning dress, Penelope, for my year of mourning, for my parents." "Well, I don't know why you bothered to change into brighter clothing once the year was up," Penelope said. "It's all wasted on you anyway. It's not as if you're ever going to find a husband, are you? You are not even a Hathergill, only a poor relation who couldn't find anyone else to take you on. Your only purpose is to help me with my debut. And instead, you're always littering and moaning at me, but Penelope this and but Penelope that. I could go mad from the endless sound of your voice." She narrowed her eyes and pointed at the dragon, who had wound himself around Eleanor's ankles. "You're exactly the same as him. Non-functional." Sir Jessamine let out a low, trilling chuckle of fear, and the steam engine finally arrived. That is it. Eleanor's ears were ringing so loudly now that she could barely hear her own voice, even as it rose to a yell so dangerous and warlike she would never have suspected herself capable of creating such a sound. That is it. What? I beg your pardon? Lady Hathergill's head jerked up as she woke from her snooze. "Did someone say it was time for tea, Penelope?" Penelope had scooted back a step at Eleanor's yell, but her shoulders stiffened at the sound of her mother's voice. "It is not time for tea, Mama," she said. "It is time for someone to explain to my cousin exactly what her place is in this household for once and for all." "Thank you, Penelope," Eleanor said, "but actually, there isn't the slightest need for that." She knelt down and scooped up Sir Jessamine with unaccustomed, fluid grace. With the steam engine's whistle still ringing in her ears, she could have easily smashed through the windows of the elegant drawing room, or picked up the piano in the corner and thrown it straight at her cousin's pretty blonde head. It posed no difficulty at all to scoop up one trembling, chuckling dragon and set him securely on her shoulder. "You have made yourself perfectly clear," said Eleanor, "so I shall do you the favor of removing both my non-functioning self and your non-functioning dragon from your life. Unlike you, this dragon is not a wild animal, so he at least deserves some courtesy." "Oh!" Penelope shrieked. "Mother! Did you hear what she just said to me?" "Oh, dear," Lady Hathergill moaned and put one hand over her eyes. Perched on Eleanor's shoulder, Sir Jessamine let out one last chuckle of terror, and through her ringing ears and haze of fury, Eleanor finally remembered what that sound always signified when it came from this particular dragon. "Oh, no," she breathed. Hastily, she began to stroke his back. "Please, Sir Jessamine, please don't, not now." But she was too late. Hot, steaming dragon slime exploded down the back of her gown, soaking through to her skin as Penelope's shrieks of outrage rattled the chandelier overhead. It wasn't quite the exit that Eleanor had hoped for, but she held her chin high as she marched out of the room with Sir Jessamine shivering on her shoulder and her wet, slimy skirts sticking to her legs at every step.